Welcome to Rabbit Tales. Today, we're diving into a new story, filled with emotions and drama. Let's get started. I want to divorce my husband, but everyone keeps telling me I will die alone if I do. So my son is experiencing a psychological crisis because of the rumors about his father's affair. What is the best course of action? My name is Sarah, and I am a 37-year-old mother of 3 wonderful children, a 12-year-old son named Jack, a 9-year-old daughter named Mia, and the youngest Lily, who is just for my husband Tom, is 40 years old. We have been married for 15 years, but our journey together began 5 years prior to our vows, making it a total of 2 decades. Side by side over the years, we built a life that, on the surface, seemed almost idyllic, filled with the usual ups and downs of family life, but grounded in what I believed was a solid partnership. We met in college, drawn together by mutual interests and mutual friends. Tom was studying to be an engineer, and I was immersed in my psychology courses. We were young and ambitious, each with dreams that seemed to align perfectly with the others. After graduation, we moved in together, and not long after, we decided to marry. It was a simple ceremony, but it was ours, and it felt like the beginning of a promising future. The early years of our marriage were busy and vibrant. We were both climbing our respective career ladders, Tom at an engineering firm and myself in a private counseling practice. Children soon followed, and with each addition, our home grew more lively and chaotic in the best way. Jack's birth brought a new kind of love into our lives, and with Mia and Lily, our family felt complete. Life settled into a comfortable routine. Mornings were a flurry of breakfasts, hurriedly eaten, school bags packed in a rush, and quick kisses goodbye. Evenings were for family dinners, homework help, and the occasional movie night, when we could all agree on what to watch. Tom and I were partners in the truest sense, sharing responsibilities and supporting each other's ambitions. Our family life had a dynamic that worked well for us. I have always been the primary earner in our household, thanks to a successful career in private practice that flourished over the years. This provided us with comfort and stability. Although Tom's financial contributions were less substantial, they always felt equally important in the balance of our shared life. He was a devoted father, and until this incident, I had believed him to be a dedicated husband as well. But not all was as perfect as it seemed. About a year ago, I began to notice changes in Tom that I initially dismissed as stress from work or the usual ebb and flow of marriage. He became more guarded with his phone. His schedule grew increasingly erratic, and there were nights he seemed distant, lost in thought I could not reach. I asked if anything was wrong, but his answers were always the same: just tired, just busy. The day the truth about Tom's infidelity came to light started like any other. I had woken up early to prepare breakfast for the kids and get them ready for school. The morning rush had become a routine I could navigate almost mechanically, which probably explained why I first noticed the subtle changes in Tom's behavior. He was distracted, not his usual self, who would playfully help pack lunches or tease Mia about her perpetually mismatched socks. That particular morning, Tom had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered normally. I respected his privacy as he did mine. But a message flashed across the screen just as I was cleaning up. It was from someone named Jen, and it read, "Can't wait for tonight." My heart skipped a beat. Confusion and curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself doing something I had never thought I would do. I picked up his phone and opened the message. The conversation thread was a gut punch. There were plans for dinner, exchanges of "I miss you" and "can't wait to see you," all interwoven with heart and kiss emojis. The playful intimacy of their words was starkly absent from our recent exchanges. I scrolled through weeks of deceit, each message a hammer striking at the foundation of our marriage. Feeling like a stranger in my own kitchen, I set the phone down and tried to steady my breathing. I felt betrayed, foolish, and unbearably hurt. Tom came down dressed for work, and I saw him in a different light. No longer the man I trusted implicitly, but a stranger who had brought deception into our home. I confronted him immediately, my voice trembling, as I asked him about Jen S. He froze, his face draining of color. His initial reaction was to stammer, to claim it was nothing, but as I described the messages I had read, his shoulders slumped and he confessed. The Jen S. was Jennifer Stone, our daughter Mia's teacher. The affair had been going on for months. The air between us felt charged with a cold electricity. Words flew between us, his apologies and pleas mingling with my tears and accusations. I demanded to know why, but his explanations, stale lines about feeling disconnected and lost, offered no real comfort or understanding. Our once warm kitchen felt like a bleak, hollow space. The impact of his betrayal was immediate and overwhelming. I was consumed by a torrent of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief. The man I had built a life with, had children with, had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. And not just me, but our family. Our children. I couldn't stay in the same house as Tom that day. I needed space to think and to breathe, to escape the oppressive atmosphere of betrayal. I dropped the kids off at school, barely holding myself together, long enough to see them into their classrooms. Then, instead of heading to work, I drove aimlessly, ending up at a local park, where I sat on a bench overlooking a duck pond, a place that had once been a sanctuary for family outings. Sitting there, I felt the weight of the reality that my marriage was possibly over. Yet there was also a fierce determination brewing within me. I knew I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just play the role of the forgiving spouse, brushing the affair under the rug as if it were just a minor hiccup in our marriage. This was a breach of trust that cut deep, and it demanded action after hours of sitting alone. I made a decision that felt like the only viable one. I would confront Jennifer Stone. This wasn't just about facing the woman who was involved with my husband. It was about reclaiming some sense of control over the chaos that was suddenly my life. It was about protecting my family, my children, and my own self-respect. After ensuring the kids were at school and making sure Mia was in a different class for the day, I went to see Jennifer. I found her in her classroom. Before the school day began, the room bright with children's artwork and the promise of lessons yet to be learned. Jennifer looked surprised to see me, a polite smile fading from her face. As she noticed the seriousness of my expression, I closed the door behind me, my heart pounding in my chest. The confrontation was direct, intense. I asked her if she knew that Tom was married, that he had children who looked up to her as a teacher. Her apology was quiet and seemed sincere, but it did little to quench the fire of my anger. I told her that I would be reporting the affair to the school board. It was not a decision driven by revenge, but by a need to see some form of accountability. I left her classroom feeling shaky but empowered, having taken the first steps in reshaping my life and my children's future. As I drove home, my phone buzzed, continuously lighting up with incoming calls that I stubbornly ignored. The screen showed Tom's name again and again, each call a reminder of the chasm that had opened up between us. I couldn't bring myself to answer, not yet. My thoughts were still raw, my emotions a tangled mess of hurt and indignation. Each ring felt like an intrusion, an insistence to listen to excuses I wasn't ready to hear. When the ringing finally ceased, the silence was quickly filled with the ping of incoming texts. I glanced at the screen. Tom's words appeared desperate on the digital display. "I'm sorry," one read, followed swiftly by, "I will break up with her. I promise, just give me a chance." The messages piled up, each more pleading than the last. He promised disengagement, swore it was over. "You know how much you and the kids mean to me now." As I drove, his words churned through my mind. Was this plea for forgiveness rooted in a genuine realization of his mistake, or was it motivated by the fear of losing the comfortable life we had built? I pondered his sincerity, weighed against the practical aspects of our life together. Could a man who feared the loss of a lifestyle be trusted not to stray again if the opportunity presented itself under less dire circumstances? Yet as I pulled into our driveway and killed the engine, the tranquility of our home from the outside belied the turmoil I felt within. Walking through the front door, I was greeted by the quiet of an empty house. The kids were still at school, and Tom was likely dreading this inevitable confrontation. Somewhere else, the stillness gave me room to think, to really consider my next steps. Sitting down at the kitchen table, where so many family meals had been shared, I laid my keys and phone in front of me. Tom's texts continued to light up the screen, intermittently, each message a threat, attempting to sow up the terror in our relationship. I thought about what it would mean to give Tom another chance. Could trust genuinely be rebuilt from such a betrayal? Was I willing to invest more years in a relationship that might never regain its former strength? These were not questions that could be answered in the heat of emotion. They required reflection and possibly professional guidance. Yet more than the betrayal itself, it was the manner of discovery that stung sharply. If I hadn't seen those messages, would Tom have continued the affair? Content in his duplicity, the thought was chilling, and brought with it a wave of loneliness, an isolation that stemmed not from being alone physically, but from realizing the emotional gulf that had developed between us. Without my noticing, feeling utterly empty and overwhelmed, I picked up the phone and dialed my best friend, whose advice I always valued in times of crisis. As soon as she answered, my resolve crumbled, and I found myself sobbing into the phone, unable to fully articulate the deep sense of betrayal I felt. She listened patiently, her voice a steady calm in the storm of my emotions. After I managed to explain everything, she insisted that divorce was the only viable option. However, she also suggested that I should talk to my mother before making any decisions, considering her experience with a similar situation. Despite her advice, I hesitated to call my mother directly. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, worried it might carry either an "I told you so" or undue sympathy, neither of which I felt prepared to handle. Instead, I turned to an online community where I had an anonymous account, hoping to gain some perspective from people who had faced similar dilemmas. I laid out my story in a post, asking for guidance and support from those who had navigated the treacherous waters of infidelity and divorce. The responses began to trickle in, and as I read through them, a sinking feeling took over. Many comments were disheartening, and some echoed societal cliché that I had hoped to avoid. One might think I will be a single mother. A single mother with 3 children has difficulty finding a new partner. We have luggage besides. I'm already 37. Some might conclude I should just let him cheat, because in the end, he still provides and pays the bills. Considerations about the children are common. Think about your children and how it will affect them. Divorce is always harsh for children. Each comment felt like a jab, questioning my self-worth and the legitimacy of my feelings. Was I being selfish? I pondered deeply about my children's futures. What would happen to them without their father's constant presence? Would my decision to divorce scar them emotionally, or make them feel abandoned? The weight of these considerations bore down on me as I tried to separate the societal expectations from my own needs and the well-being of my children. The thought that kept returning to me was whether staying in a loveless marriage, just for the sake of appearance or financial stability, was genuinely better for the kids. Could I teach them about respect and self-worth if I didn't uphold those principles myself? After hours of internal debate, I decided it was time to speak with my mother. I needed her perspective as someone who had walked this path before, someone who knew firsthand the pain and repercussions of such a decision. As I dialed my mother's number, the heaviness in my chest made each ring seem to echo louder. When she answered, her voice was a soothing balm, but it did little to ease the knot of anxiety lodged deep within me. Mom, I began, my voice betraying the chaos of emotions I felt swirling inside me. I need your advice. There was a pause as I gathered my thoughts. Then I poured out everything I told her. About discovering Tom's affair, the confrontation with him and Jennifer Stone, and the unbearable hurt and betrayal that followed. I tried to steady my voice, but the pain laced through every word. My mother listened in silence on the other end of the line. There were no interruptions, just the quiet understanding of someone who has walked a painfully similar path. When I finished, there was a heavy pause, a moment filled with shared sorrow, stretching across the miles between us. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and tinged with a sadness that spoke of old, deep wounds. Sarah, I know how you feel. She began, her words slow and deliberate. You know I went through this with your father. When he cheated, I felt my world had ended. I made the decision to leave, and he never forgave me for it. He left us, and I was alone with you until you were grown. Her story wasn't new to me, but hearing it in this moment, framed by my own shattered marriage, gave it a different weight. Sometimes I wish I hadn't divorced him, she continued, her voice cracking slightly. He was angry, felt betrayed that I wouldn't try to work things out. Maybe if I had, you'd still have a dad who was present, not just a memory. The weight of her regret settled over me like a shroud. I had always known the narrative of their split, from her perspective, but now, I found myself wondering about the myriad of what-ifs that haunted her decisions. He left because he couldn't handle the rejection, not just of his affair, but of his hope for reconciliation. I stayed single for so long because I was scared, sir. I didn't want to bring someone new into our lives, who might hurt us more, or worse, hurt you. You have a daughter, and you are my daughter. I didn't get married, because I didn't want what men would do to my daughter. I wanted to protect you, maybe sometimes too much. Her admission was a knife, twisting in my already wounded heart. Protection, fear of further betrayal, and the loneliness of single parenthood were themes that resonated too well with me now. It made me question the path I had started down. With such conviction, think about it, sweetheart. She urged softly, consider all the sides. I know it's hard, I know you're hurt. But you have your children to think about. Whatever you decide, make sure it's a decision you can live with. In the long term, don't rush into anything driven by hurt. Her words echoed in my mind. Long after we said our goodbyes, I sat alone, the silence of the house enveloping me, allowing me to stew in my thoughts. Mom's experiences served as a cautionary tale, but also a poignant reminder of the complexities involved in such deeply personal decisions. Tom's betrayal had cut me deeply, undermining not just our marriage, but my understanding of our entire life together. Yet my mother's words haunted me. The possibility of regret, of making a decision too hastily in a moment of pain that could have long-reaching consequences, not just for me, but for my children. Could I live with the same regrets my mother carried? Was I strong enough to handle the challenges of single parenthood without becoming bitter or overly protective? As she had these questions churned in my mind. As I considered the reality of my situation, My children were still so young, so impressionable. What would this do to them? Jack, Mia, and Lily were my world. Their well-being had to come first, but how to best ensure it was a puzzle, with pieces that didn't seem to fit together anymore. The thought of tearing their lives apart by removing their father from our home broke my heart. But so did the idea of them growing up in a home devoid of genuine love and trust between their parents. As the days passed, these thoughts were never far from my mind. I watched the children play, their laughter bittersweet to my ears, a stark contrast to the silence between Tom and me. We were like ghosts in the same house, awkward and polite, but the warmth we once shared had cooled into something formal and strained. The need for a decision pressed on me, each day heavier than the last. I thought about counseling, wondering if it could possibly mend what had been broken. Could a therapist help us find a way back to each other, or at least to a place where we could co-parent effectively and without resentment? Or was the gap between us now too wide, the hurt too deep? These thoughts were my constant companions, haunting the quiet moments of my days and the long, sleepless nights. What was best for the kids? What was best for me? Could those two answers ever align again? In the wake of Tom's betrayal, however, living with Tom while we sorted out our separation was a daily struggle. Every look, every accidental touch was a painful reminder of the betrayal. I couldn't stand being near him. His presence in our home, once a source of comfort and joy, now felt suffocating. I recoiled instinctively the last time he reached out, his hand brushing mine as he passed the salt at dinner. I snatched my hand back as if burned. The simple gesture was laden with the weight of his infidelity, rendering him a stranger in the eyes of the woman who had loved him deeply. Living under the same roof in such tension was like navigating a minefield. We were civil mostly for the kids' sake, but the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words and stifled emotions. It became clear that cohabiting was temporary, a necessary arrangement, until we could figure out the logistics of our separation. However, the issue of abandonment was something I couldn't easily shake off. Having experienced the pain of my father leaving after my parents' divorce, I was acutely aware of the scars it could leave on a child. I feared repeating history, worried about how my children would cope with the breakdown of our family unit. Would they understand why I had to make this decision? Would they resent me, or worse, think that all relationships were doomed to fail? The idea of living as roommates was briefly considered. It seemed a practical solution on the surface, maintaining a stable home environment for the kids while leading separate lives. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was not feasible. The emotional toll it would take on all of us would be too great. Our home would become a facade, a place where we played roles rather than lived our lives. I didn't want that for my children. They deserved a home filled with genuine affection and respect, not silent battles and forced interactions. The decision to proceed with the divorce was reinforced by these reflections. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, from logistical nightmares to emotional upheaval. But I also knew it was the right thing to do. I needed to show my children that it was okay to stand up for oneself, that self-respect was crucial, and that happiness could sometimes require hard choices. Update: living in the same house while preparing for divorce proceedings was like threading a needle with shaky hands. We maintained a facade of normalcy for the sake of our children, who were still blissfully unaware of the seismic shifts beneath the surface of our family life. This delicate balance was further complicated when I had to undergo LASIK surgery. The procedure meant I couldn't strain my eyes with activities like watching movies or reading for 48 to 72 hours, and even everyday tasks became challenging due to the need to avoid dust and pressure on my eyes. In the days following my surgery, Tom took on a role that I hadn't seen him fill in years. If ever so fully, he managed the household chores. From dusting to cooking and laundry, he was attentive, gently reminding me to take my eye drops and checking in to make sure I was comfortable. For a brief moment, it felt like the old days, when our partnership seemed solid and loving. I found myself wondering if this was the man I had fallen in love with, who had somehow re-emerged amidst our current turmoil. However, these thoughts were fleeting. I couldn't help but remember that this level of care and cooperation was uncharacteristic for Tom, especially in recent years. When I had been bedridden with the flu last winter, he had hardly lifted a finger unless prompted, and loudly at that. His sudden change of behavior seemed conveniently timed, almost as if he was performing the acts of a devoted husband to sway my decision on the divorce. It was difficult not to view his efforts strategically aimed at winning favor, rather than genuine acts of love or repentance. Kindness he showed post-surgery did little to erase the vivid memories of the betrayal. The messages I had read between him and his affair partner still haunted me. The intimacy and affection they shared, documented in those texts, were a stark contrast to the utilitarian exchanges that had become the norm between us. 2 days of him playing the role of caretaker couldn't compensate for the months of deception and the emotional scars it left. With these thoughts heavy on my mind, I decided it was time to have a candid conversation with Tom wearing my new glasses, which somehow made me feel more shielded and composed. I sat him down and explained that my decision to divorce was unchanged. I reassured him that I wasn't planning to sever his relationship with our children. He would always be their father, but he could no longer be my husband. I suggested that we attend family counseling, not to rebuild our marriage, but to ensure we could co-parent effectively and provide a stable environment for our kids. During our discussion, Tom's demeanor was somber. He apologized profusely for his actions and for the first time opened up about the affair, in a way that wasn't just excuses. He admitted that he saw the affair as an escape from our routine of life, not realizing the full impact of what he was risking: our family, our trust, and even the professional life of the woman he was involved with. He told me he had ended the affair and cut off all contact with her, acknowledging the destruction he had caused. Tom also expressed a dramatic resolve, claiming he would never date again. I cautioned him against making such sweeping declarations. Promises now, no matter how earnest, felt like mere words after the trust between us had been so thoroughly broken. The ordeal of dealing with my husband's infidelity has been heart-wrenching, not just for me, but distressingly so for our children. The ripple effects of this betrayal have touched every part of our lives, perhaps none more painful than the lives of our 3 children, Jack, Mia, and Lily. Another problem we are facing now is our kids. Jack, our eldest, has been the most affected. At 12, he's at that age where he understands far more than one would wish. For a child his age, the news of his father's affair has not only shaken the foundations of his family, but seems to have shattered his view of his dad. Recently, I found out that rumors of the affair had circulated at his school. It's a small community. News travels fast and at times cruelly. This exposure has only added to his hurt and confusion. His reaction has been to retreat into silence, particularly around his father. Jack has taken to refusing meals prepared by Tom. Just last week, Tom made spaghetti, a family favorite, and tried to lighten the mood with a joke about his famous secret sauce. Jack didn't laugh. He didn't even acknowledge his father. Instead, he pushed his plate away and made himself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The following days, he stuck to this diet, adamantly preparing his own meals. Mia and Lily, not fully understanding the situation, but feeling the lead of their older brother, soon joined him. It's been peanut butter and jelly for days. Now, the impact on Tom has been profound. I've caught him crying quietly in the garage after these mealtime rejections. It breaks my heart despite everything. Tom loves his children deeply. He may have failed as a husband, but he has always been a dedicated father. He coaches Jack's soccer team. He's been there for every ballet recital Mia reluctantly participated in, and he's the first to get up at night when Lily cries out from a bad dream. I understand the children's reactions. They feel betrayed by their father's actions, which have disrupted the only world they've ever known. But at the same time, I don't want them to lose their father, to wrap their young hearts in bitterness. This is a crucial moment, and how we handle it could affect their ability to trust and form relationships for the rest of their lives. I've thought about reaching out for professional help. Perhaps a family counselor could provide the tools we need to navigate this painful period. Jack, in particular, might benefit from talking to someone who could offer him a neutral ear and wise guidance. Tom and I have discussed this, even in the midst of our own tumultuous feelings. We agree that regardless of the future of our marriage, we need to be co-parents first. Our priority is, and must always be, the well-being of our children. We are considering starting with some family therapy sessions. Though Tom and I are in the midst of a divorce, we need to find a way to work together to help our children adjust to this new reality. This is not just about getting through the day-to-day anymore. It's about laying a foundation for our children that shows them that even in times of deep hurt and betrayal, there can be healing, there can be forgiveness, not necessarily for the sake of reconciliation between the parted spouses, but for the ongoing relationship between a father and his children, and indeed, for the children's future selves. To anyone who might read this and has gone through similar struggles, any advice on how to handle these situations, especially with children of varying ages, would be deeply appreciated. How do you maintain the delicate balance between acknowledging their feelings of betrayal while also fostering forgiveness, not for the sake of the parent who wronged, but for their own future emotional health? This is the question that occupies my thoughts day and night as we try to piece together a new kind of normal.